Economic growth. Think about it. It's the one goal that it seems like every government, every political party, every nation on Earth can actually agree on. It's always presented as this natural, totally necessary, and desirable thing. But what if I told you that this idea, the one that basically rules our entire world, is actually a pretty recent invention, an ideology that we created, and then kind of just forgot that we made it up? Okay, let's get into it.
It really doesn't matter where you look, does it? From capitalist democracies to socialist states, the mission is always the same: keep the economy expanding, forever. It's the promise that's supposed to make everything else okay, you know? It lets us put off the tough questions about fairness because we're told that a rising tide will lift all boats.
Yeah, you heard that right. The whole concept of the economy as a single measurable thing that has to constantly grow, that was only dreamed up in the 1930s, and it only really took over the whole planet in the 1950s. So, how on earth did we get here? Well, let's start by busting a few myths.
All right, first up is this huge assumption that our current state of crazy exponential growth is just normal. That it's always been this way. But a quick peek at the last 2,000 years of history tells a very, very different story. Okay, so just look at this chart. The first thing that should jump out at you is, well, how flat it is. For almost 2,000 years, for most of human history, economic growth was teeny tiny, basically just tied to how many people there were. Then, around the 20th century, something happens. Something completely unprecedented. The line doesn't just curve up, it goes vertical.
And this is what scientists call the Great Acceleration. And here's the thing, it wasn't just about money. This was a total transformation of our relationship with the planet. It was an explosion in, well, pretty much everything, starting with the number of human beings on the planet, which just suddenly skyrocketed. Our consumption of energy, which, surprise, surprise, followed the exact same exponential curve.
And the number of cars, trucks, and planes, which just exploded from practically zero to over 1 billion.
And of course, so did our impact. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere shot up in perfect lockstep with everything else. This wasn't natural, it wasn't ancient, it was a sudden, almost violent break from the entire human past.
So if this crazy growth is such a recent thing, how do we even measure it? Well, that brings us to our second big myth, the idea that gross domestic products, or GDP, is just a simple, neutral scientific metric. It is not. It was a political tool from day one.
Just look at this timeline. It tells the whole story. GDP was literally born out of the Great Depression, just to give leaders a handle on the crisis. Then, it was sharpened into a tool to plan for World War II. And after that, it became the main battlefield of the Cold War, with the USS and the USSR competing to see who could get the highest growth rate. This wasn't some quiet academic exercise. It was forged in crisis, war, and conflict.
And this part is absolutely crucial. The guy who invented the national accounts, an economist named Simon Kuznets, he wanted to measure national well-being. He argued that we should subtract things that don't actually make us better off, like weapons manufacturing. But the politicians, they wanted a simple tool to measure total output for the war effort, so they chose to count everything. An oil spill and the massive cleanup effort, that makes GDP go up. It's kind of wild when you stop to think about it.
I mean, this quote from Soviet Premier Khrushchev just perfectly captures the mindset of that era. Economic growth wasn't just about prosperity. It was an ideological weapon. It was a battering ram, a stand-in for war in a world that was terrified of nuclear annihilation.
So if the Great Acceleration was so dramatic, what was its engine? Standard economics will point to things like capital, labor, and this vague black box they call technology. But that story leaves out some of the most important and, frankly, some of the most violent ingredients. This whole explosion of growth was really built on 3 foundational inputs that often get ignored. First, a massive one-time inheritance of cheap, powerful energy from fossil fuels. Second, centuries of colonial plunder. We're talking about expropriated land, resources, and the immense labor of enslaved people. And third, the systematically uncounted and unpaid care work, mostly done by women, that raised and maintained the entire workforce.
And to really wrap your head around the scale of this, just consider the energy packed into fossil fuels. A single barrel of oil contains the energy equivalent of years and years of hard physical work by a human being. It's an almost unimaginable amount of power. And this is the result. The amount of fossil fuel energy we consume today is like every single one of us having 50 invisible workers at our beck and call, 24 hours a day. You could say that fossil fuels effectively replaced human slaves as the primary engine of economic growth. And this, of course, brings us to our final and maybe most challenging myth. The idea that this explosive growth can and should just continue forever on a finite planet.
The logic of compound growth is just relentless. An economy growing at just 3% per year, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? Doubles in size every 24 years. And as this chart shows, if you project that forward, the numbers quickly become completely absurd, shooting toward infinity. By logical necessity, it has to end. The only real questions are when and how.
And one of the hard limits is energy. This chart shows our profound dependency. I mean, the Great Acceleration was powered almost entirely by fossil fuels, and even with the rise of renewables, they still absolutely dominate our energy system today.
But here's the thing. Not all energy is created equal. The key concept here is something called energy return on investment, or EROI. Basically, how much energy do you get out for every unit of energy you put in to get it? And studies suggest that to sustain the kind of growth we have, a society needs an overall EROI of at least 11 to 1.
So this is the crucial point. Look at this table. The historic fossil fuels that built our world had incredibly high EROI ratios. We're talking 80 to 1 for some coal. The easy-to-get oil from the past had returns of 50 to 1 or even higher. Now, while some renewables are pretty good, many of them have a significantly lower EROI. Solar, for example, is hovering right around that minimum threshold needed to sustain growth, and others, like biofuels, fall way short.
So, to wrap this all up, the explosive economic growth we take for granted is not ancient or natural, it's barely a century old. The way we measure it, GDP, isn't some neutral number, it's a political construct straight out of the Cold War. And the hidden engine that powered it all, that one-time blast of cheap fossil energy and expropriated labor, is reaching its physical limits.
Which leaves us with the defining question of the 21st century. The idea of infinite growth was born in a very specific moment in history. Now that the conditions that created it are changing, we have to ask ourselves, if the pursuit of endless growth is a myth, what story do we want to tell next?